So the expansion draft rules are out, and my first reaction is that the Portland Fire and the Toronto Tempo are in a tough spot. I mean, it's always hard to be an expansion team, and you go through one of these drafts, and the other franchises are protecting their best players or the players that they see the most potential in, and you're choosing from the...
The expansion draft rules just dropped, and if you look closely at what the WNBA announced, there's one detail buried in the fine print that changes everything for teams like Indiana. Because while everyone's focused on who gets protected, the real story is what happens to the players who don't. And for the Fever, that decision just got a whole lot more complicated.
And if a player who is not signed to a contract for the 2026 season is selected by Portland or Toronto, the selecting team will receive whatever rights to such player that the existing team would have had if that player was not selected in the expansion draft. Meaning they, whatever the situation was where they were, they're not under contract, going forward, that's the situation they inherit. Any player who has completed the playing services called for by her previous...
Let's break down what that actually means. Portland and Toronto each get to select one unrestricted free agent in this expansion draft. Just one. And here's the kicker. If they pick that player, they become the only team allowed to offer them a supermax contract. Nobody else can match it. Not their old team. Not any other franchise. It's an exclusive negotiating window designed to keep talent from immediately walking back out the door. And that changes the entire calculation for teams trying to figure out their protection lists.
Now, what does that mean for a team like the Indiana Fever? When you look at the Fever and who they should protect in the expansion draft, and going back and forth and back and forth, when I was talking to Ryan Rucco earlier today, we were both talking about Sophie Cunningham, right? Like, protecting Sophie Cunningham feels like the move to do. But if you look at the Fever's roster situation, obviously they'll protect Caitlin Clark, who is under the rookie contract. Obviously, they'll protect Aaliyah Boston, who's still under the rookie contract, right? Like, those two are absolute locks, and you get to protect 5 players. They'll protect...
This is where it gets interesting for Indiana. The Fever have 5 protection slots. 3 of them are automatic. Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston are both on rookie contracts, so they're locks. Lexi Hull is a restricted free agent, which means whoever drafts her inherits those matching rights, so she's getting protected too. That leaves 2 spots. And conventional wisdom says you protect Kelsey Mitchell, especially if you're planning to use the core designation to keep her under contract. But that 5th spot, that's where the debate begins.
And Sophie Cunningham. And I say this as someone who's not all that high on Michaela Timpson. Like, she hasn't blown me away. She definitely has some talent, length, ability to block shots. Hopefully, she can polish her offensive game. But look, lost at times last year, a lot of the time. And I'm not like one of these folks that think, oh my goodness, there's no way you could ever let her go, right? Like, if you gave me the choice, who would I rather see on the Indiana Fever next year, Sophie Cunningham or Michaela Timpson? I'm taking Sophie.
The obvious choice feels like Sophie Cunningham. She's a veteran presence, a proven three-point shooter, and someone who fits the culture Indiana is building. But here's the problem with that logic. If Portland or Toronto wants Sophie badly enough to use their one unrestricted free agent pick on her, they're going to offer her a supermax. And if they're willing to do that through the expansion draft, they could just as easily offer her a max contract in regular free agency anyway. These expansion teams aren't going to be cap-strapped. They're starting fresh with clean books.
They're going to be selected under these rules by one of those 2 teams. So almost surely gone out the door and a member of the Toronto Tempo or the Portland Fire. Meanwhile, with Sophie Cunningham, if one of those teams were to select her as their unrestricted free agent, that means they're offering her a supermax to keep her.
So the question becomes, does protecting Sophie actually change anything? If she wants to stay in Indiana, she'll stay regardless. If a team offers her max money and she wants to take it, the Fever can't realistically match that anyway. Not with Aaliyah Boston becoming max eligible and Caitlin Clark's extension looming next season. You can't pay 4 players max contracts and expect to build a competitive roster around them. The math just doesn't work.
Caitlin being max eligible next season. So I suppose you run some sort of risk leaving Sophie Cunningham unprotected, but I don't know if it really changes based on what free agency would be anyway. So I'm not so sure. Like, your gut feeling says protect Sophie Cunningham, but I'm not really sure it makes sense. So she would make a lot of dollars and so therefore it doesn't make sense.
Now let's talk about NaLyssa Smith. And I'm saying this as someone who's been critical of her development. She hasn't blown me away. There's talent there, absolutely. Length, shot blocking ability, flashes of offensive potential. But she looked lost for significant stretches last season. Defensive rotations were late, offensive decision-making was questionable, and the consistency just wasn't there. I'm not one of these people who thinks it would be catastrophic to lose her. If you gave me a choice between keeping Sophie or keeping NaLyssa, I'm taking Sophie every single time.
And with a free agent, your head gets spinning a little bit because you think about all the free agents and how the hell are the Tempo and the Fire going to fill out a roster under these circumstances. Hopefully they've got good international scouting departments. That will take place on April 3rd, by the way, the expansion draft, which I believe is the same date as the semifinals of the NCAA tournament. So the women's basketball business is about to pick up big time. It's about to pick up big time. And yeah, finally we got the...
But here's the reality check. If Indiana leaves NaLyssa Smith unprotected, she's gone. Not maybe gone, definitely gone. One of these two expansion teams is absolutely selecting her. She's a former number 2 overall pick, still on a rookie contract. She's young, she's got upside, and she's cost-controlled. For a team building from scratch, that's exactly the profile you target. Portland or Toronto would be thrilled to grab her. Meanwhile, Sophie Cunningham is an unrestricted free agent who's going to test the market regardless. The Fever don't control her destiny either way. So from a pure asset management perspective, you protect the player you can actually keep, and that's NaLyssa Smith.
So she would make a lot of dollars and so therefore it doesn't make sense. Therefore I think that's the 5. It will be CC, Boston, Hull, Timpson, and Mitchell. And the Kelsey situation still has to be determined as well.
So here's what Indiana's protection list is almost certainly going to look like. Caitlin Clark, obvious. Aaliyah Boston, obvious. Lexi Hull, restricted free agent rights make this a no-brainer. NaLyssa Smith, because leaving her unprotected guarantees you lose her. And Kelsey Mitchell, assuming they're planning to use the core designation, which keeps their championship window open while they figure out her long-term future. That means Sophie Cunningham goes unprotected. And before Fever fans panic, think about what that actually means. If Portland or Toronto uses their one unrestricted free agent pick on Sophie, they're signaling they want to build around her as a core piece. They're offering supermax money, and if they're willing to do that, Sophie was probably leaving Indiana anyway. You can't compete with that kind of offer when you've got 3 other max-level players to pay. But here's the more likely scenario. Neither expansion team uses their unrestricted free agent pick on Sophie Cunningham. Because while she's a solid veteran and a good locker room presence, she's not a franchise cornerstone. She's not someone you build an expansion team around. Portland and Toronto are going to use that precious unrestricted free agent slot on someone with higher upside or bigger name recognition. Someone who can sell tickets and generate buzz in a new market. Which means Sophie hits regular free agency, just like she would have anyway. And at that point, it's a straightforward negotiation. Does she want to stay in Indiana with Caitlin and Aaliyah and compete for championships? Or does she want to chase a bigger payday somewhere else? The expansion draft doesn't really change that calculation. And this is the part that should terrify Portland and Toronto. Look at the broader landscape of this expansion draft. Nearly every impact player in the WNBA is either on a rookie contract or about to hit unrestricted free agency. The new collective bargaining agreement completely reshaped the player movement rules. 5+ years of service means unrestricted free agency. No team control, no matching rights, just pure open market. So when these expansion teams sit down to make their picks, they're not selecting from a pool of locked-in talent. They're selecting negotiating rights to players who can walk away the moment free agency opens. And they only get supermax exclusivity on 1 player each. Every other unrestricted free agent they draft can just sign elsewhere for the same money. Think about how brutal that is. You're building a roster from scratch. You get 2 rounds of picks from 13 existing teams. And most of the players available are either restricted free agents with matching rights or unrestricted free agents who have 0 obligation to stay. The Golden State Valkyries had it significantly easier. They were the only expansion team, so they had first choice of every unprotected player. Portland and Toronto have to split the available talent pool while competing against each other and against the rest of the league in free agency. This is why international scouting is about to become absolutely critical for these franchises. You can't build a competitive roster solely through an expansion draft where half the players you select might leave before training camp. You need to find talent overseas. You need to nail your college draft picks. And you need to get creative with how you structure contracts to convince free agents that your rebuilding project is worth joining. The expansion draft is scheduled for April 3rd, which happens to be the same date as the women's Final Four semifinals. So we're going to have a 48-hour window where women's basketball completely dominates the sports conversation. You've got the best college players in the country competing for a national championship, and you've got two new WNBA franchises making their first roster selections. The media coverage is going to be wall-to-wall, and that's exactly what the league needs right now. Coming off a season where ratings shattered records and attendance broke barriers, the WNBA is riding momentum like never before. Adding two more franchises expands the footprint, creates new markets, and gives more players opportunities to compete at the highest level. But the success of Portland and Toronto depends entirely on how well their front offices navigate these expansion draft rules. Because here's the thing about expansion teams. The deck is always stacked against you. You're choosing from players that 13 other teams decided they could live without. You're trying to build chemistry with a roster of cast-offs and rookies. You're asking free agents to believe in a vision that doesn't exist yet. And in this case, you're doing it under a collective bargaining agreement that gives players more freedom of movement than ever before. The Valkyries did an impressive job building their roster through creativity and strong scouting. They identified undervalued players, they made smart trades, and they convinced free agents to buy into their culture. But they had the advantage of being first. Portland and Toronto are coming into a market where teams have already seen the expansion playbook. Front offices know which players might be targeted. Agents are already having conversations about leveraging expansion interest into better contracts elsewhere. So when we talk about Indiana protecting Melissa Smith over Sophie Cunningham, we're really talking about asset control in an environment where assets are harder to control than ever. The Fever can keep Smith under contract through her rookie deal. They cannot keep Cunningham if someone offers her significantly more money than they're willing to pay. It's not about who's the better player right now. It's about who you can actually retain. And that's the calculation every team is making as they finalize their protection lists. You've got 5 spots. You use them on players you can keep, players with upside, and players who are core to your future. Everyone else goes into the pool, and you hope the expansion teams either don't value them or can't convince them to stay. For teams with established cores like Indiana, this expansion draft is more of an inconvenience than an existential threat. They might lose a rotation player or two, but their foundation remains intact. Caitlin Clark and Alia Boston aren't going anywhere. Kelsey Mitchell will be cored if necessary. The supporting cast might change, but the championship window stays open. But for teams that are already rebuilding or stuck in mediocrity, this expansion draft could accelerate their decline. Losing even a mid-tier starter when you're trying to build something can set you back another year. And with 2 teams picking instead of 1, twice as many franchises are going to feel that sting. The league announced these rules knowing full well that some teams are going to be upset with the outcome. That's the cost of expansion. You dilute the talent pool in the short term to grow the league in the long term. Portland and Toronto represent new markets, new fan bases, new revenue streams. In 5 years, if both franchises are competitive and drawing crowds, nobody's going to remember which role players got selected in the 2026 expansion draft. But in the immediate term, front offices across the league are gaming out every possible scenario. Who do we protect? Who do we leave exposed? If we lose this player, can we replace them in free agency? If we protect this player, are we just delaying the inevitable? And then there's the college draft element. Portland and Toronto will alternate picks 6 and 7 in each round. Not great, but not terrible either. In a strong draft class, you can find rotation players that late in the first round. In a weak draft class, you're reaching on projects and hoping player development can turn them into contributors. The snake format in the expansion draft at least gives both teams a fair shot. Whoever wins the coin toss and picks first in round 1 has to pick second in round 2. So there's some balance built in. But ultimately, both franchises are going to walk away from draft night with rosters full of question marks, unproven rookies, veterans on expiring deals, international players who might not pan out, and a whole lot of uncertainty. That's why the one unrestricted free agent pick is so valuable. It's your chance to add someone with name recognition, someone who can be the face of the franchise while you build around them. You're not using that pick on a role player, you're using it on someone who moves the needle. either in terms of on-court production or off-court marketability. So which unrestricted free agents might be worth that kind of investment? You're looking for players who are good enough to build around but not so established that they'll refuse to join an expansion team. You're looking for players who might be undervalued by their current teams or squeezed out by salary cap constraints. You're looking for players who want a bigger role, a fresh start, or a chance to be the #1 option. And you're looking for players who can handle the pressure of being an expansion team's cornerstone. Because make no mistake, whoever gets selected as that one unrestricted free agent is going to have massive expectations placed on them. They're getting supermax money. They're getting marketed as the face of the franchise. They're expected to lead a roster of cast-offs to respectability while the front office figures out the long-term plan. That's a lot to ask, which is why the smart play might be to target someone who's been in a secondary role on a contender and is hungry for a chance to prove they can be a primary option. Someone with something to prove. Someone who sees the supermax offer not just as a payday but as validation. The next few months are going to be fascinating to watch. Teams finalizing protection lists, agents positioning their clients, front offices in Portland and Toronto doing their homework on every available player, media speculation about who goes where, and then on April 3rd, we'll see it all play out in real time. The WNBA has never done a dual expansion draft before. The league has never operated under this specific CBA structure during expansion. There are going to be surprises. There are going to be reaches. There are going to be players selected that make everyone scratch their heads, and players left unprotected that seem like obvious picks. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, two new franchises are going to start building their identities: Portland Fire and Toronto Tempo. New uniforms, new arenas, new fan bases ready to embrace professional women's basketball. The product on the court might be rough in year one. That's just the reality of expansion. But the foundation gets laid in this draft. So when Indiana protects NaLyssa Smith and leaves Sophie Cunningham exposed, they're making a calculated bet. They're betting that Sophie either doesn't get picked, or that if she does get picked, she was leaving anyway. They're betting that keeping a cost-controlled young player with upside is more valuable than protecting a veteran free agent they probably can't afford to keep long-term. They're betting that their core of Clark, Boston, Hull, Smith, and Mitchell is strong enough to withstand whatever changes happen around the edges. And honestly, it's probably the right bet, because at the end of the day, championship windows in the WNBA are built around superstars, not role players. Indiana has two generational talents in Clark and Boston. Everything else is just roster construction around that foundation. If they lose Sophie Cunningham but keep their core intact, they're still title contenders. If they somehow lost NaLyssa Smith for nothing and got zero assets in return, that's just poor roster management. The expansion draft rules are out. The protection lists are due soon. And on April 3rd, we're going to find out which teams navigated this process successfully and which teams are kicking themselves for the decisions they made. For Portland and Toronto, it's the first step in what's going to be a long journey from expansion afterthought to legitimate competitor. For the rest of the league, it's a reminder that roster construction is a year-round job. And sometimes the decisions you make in February determine your fate in September. So here's my question for you. If you're running the Indiana Fever, do you protect NaLyssa Smith or Sophie Cunningham with that 5th spot? Do you prioritize the young player with team control or the veteran who fits your culture? And if you're Portland or Toronto, which unrestricted free agent are you targeting with that one precious pick? Who's worth building a franchise around? Drop your answers in the comments, because this is the kind of decision that defines front offices. Get it right and you're a genius. Get it wrong and you're explaining it for the next 3 years.